Stream.
Okay.
It's happening. All right. As always, someone has to tell us that we exist.
It's true.
How
It's
will we
true.
know?
We don't exist without you folks.
Uh, Good point. Um, so daylight savings time.
Is
It
evil and
is
sucks.
it is the dumbest thing. So apparently, the Western U.S. is planning to get rid of it, like California, Oregon, and Washington. And so I don't know if you've heard this. They're voting on this, and so BC said, "Yeah, we're in." So, if the whole West Coast gets rid of it, then we'll probably do the same thing, British Columbia, and ditch it. So, yeah,
I would so be in favor of that.
yeah. Someone's saying you're on the wrong mic. Yeah, nice eye, Paranor, nicely done. Now try. Although I'm not sure it matters whichever one you're. That's right. That's the right mic.
Okay. Sorry about that, folks. And I think that was probably nice ear.
True. Good point. Good ear. Um, Let me
And my
just.
camera is like slightly drunk at the moment. Let me see if I can level that. No, it's just going to be drunk today.
Yeah, drunk is
Okay.
okay. It's all right. I'm gonna say hi to a bunch of people. I'm gonna say oh, a very small crew today because we switched up the times and got the times wrong. Hi to Balt, VDB, Colin Jones, Helg Bjorkog, K Spence 303, Kylie Cerna, NP Crypto, Paranor, Roger Haskins, Susie Murph, Uncle Bill Druin, and Zapfan Zapfan. Hey everybody.
Hello.
What else jump in there?
And we will be thanking a new round of Patreons at the end
Must
of this
remember
episode.
to thank the patrons. Uh, that was fun. Back from Costa Rica after spending a week in paradise. I must say that place is the best. We had such a good time, and we saw uh, three of the monkeys that you can see while you're there. So we saw of the four.
Cool.
So we saw howler monkeys, squirrel monkeys, and white-faced capuchin monkeys. We saw two of the rarest birds, the bellbird and the resplendent quetzal, which was
And you
awesome.
saw these in the wild at a
Yeah,
preserve or
yeah, no,
something?
in the wild.
That's awesome.
Yeah, they don't have
That
any.
is
They don't have any
amazing.
preserves. We went to a hummingbird sanctuary, and there was probably
Uh-huh.
100 hummingbirds, and it was just because they had a lot of feeders, and so they had a pile of feeders, and so there was a zillion hummingbirds all, and like probably 10 different kinds of hummingbirds. So
That's amazing.
yeah, that place is mental. And all the different kinds of plants and flowers and stuff. Yeah, it's just beautiful. Volcanoes. So we had a great time.
That is awesome.
Yeah, and I'll probably do this spiel again. And then Paul and I recorded an episode just for Astronomy Cast, all about dust and like what is it, and then also sort of how it messed up the Bicep 2 results. So we'll be playing that as a
Okay.
bonus, probably within the next week or so, just so
Okay.
people can get a little extra content. So come on, Nightbot. Paranor is trying to get Nightbot working, and it doesn't work. Maybe I can make Nightbot go.
And I'm noticing now everyone in Discord who's like, you're on the wrong mic. You're on the wrong mic. They were all trying so hard to tell me, and I have too many windows
Wait a second.
open.
There's a Discord.
They're on the CosmoQuest Discord. Yeah, CosmoQuest is a
Oh,
Discord.
okay. I don't put the CosmoQuest Discord up. Um,
No, they're DMing me.
okay, okay. Uh, at some point, let me see if I can make Nightbot go. Um, at some point, we should figure out like, are we gonna keep using Slack? Are we gonna switch everything over to Discord? I hope the fans have an opinion,
Yeah,
cause
fans, tell us
tell us
your
what to do.
opinions. We will go where you want us to be,
Yeah,
basically.
yeah. I think I like Discord better as a communication system, but I mean, the problem is like recommended everybody go to Slack, and so they did, and now, I think my recommendation would probably be to ditch Slack entirely and shift everything over to Discord, and then we can bring it into the show. Do you bring Discord or Slack into the stuff that you're doing? You're bringing Discord in, right? Or you
Yeah, well,
or YouTube
I for
chat?
the stuff I do, I use the Twitch native chat. And then I send everyone to Discord to communicate between episodes.
Right. There, see? Two people just disagreed with each other. So there you go. Welcome to our world. This is the reality that we must face every time, which is like we are in this shifting platform space all the time, and you're trying to use a tool that does the job, but the tools go under, like Google Plus. So how can you keep using a tool that no longer exists, is no longer supported by like unfortunately everyone is going to have to just keep shifting and changing and being comfortable with new technology. It's funny, like at with my team with Universe Today, and Susie knows
Yeah.
this well. Poor Susie, which is like I have no sympathy for anyone who's like, oh my god, we're changing, because we just change all the time. We have to change all the time. Technology changes, and we just have to ride along with it. And that means that you've got some way that you used to do things, and now that thing is no longer the way things are done, and you
Hmm.
just have to learn the new thing. And it doesn't matter if you had any sympathy or an enjoyment of the way the old thing worked, because welcome to the new reality. And it's brutal. I totally get it, right? Like the I'm about to go on just a brief rant here, and then we'll get into the
It's
show.
all right.
But
I'm going to drink coffee.
yeah. So WordPress just shifted in a new editor into the
Hmm.
way posts are made, and it is completely different from the way the old editor worked. Right? You build
Yes.
stories based on blocks, and you can, and I'm sure it works great. I'm sure, somewhere
But
out
it
there.
broke everything we have.
Yeah, it broke everything that we did. It broke the way the old stories were put together. It broke the way the having to teach the writers. It broke a lot of the any plugins that you had. It was brutal.
Yeah.
And the problem is it wasn't really optional. It's just like, here's the new way. So yeah, what I've learned with all of this is simplify, simplify, simplify. Don't try to customize things too much, because if you customize, then it's just going to make everything fragile and break all the time.
Yeah.
And so now with Universe Today, for example, I'm running the stock WordPress theme.
Yeah, that I don't go so far
Yeah,
as, but I do purchase themes and customize
and you
them.
pay a terrible price.
No, I pay $20 a year.
Well, and the time spent uh, trying to deal with it. So that's all. I've been in a few conversations with you where the theme has broken, and
Yeah,
the debugging
no,
is
it's
is
true.
ongoing. Yeah, or
But
like
I actually enjoy that because I'm a sick and twisted individual. And I'm probably now spending more than 19.95 a year. That's what I used to spend.
yeah,
But
and whatever your time is
it's
worth.
it's also for my personal pleasure. So,
You are the coder of the family. All right. Well, I think we've gotten past the initial part. So why don't we get into the show now? You've got a book out. So what time? Give me an exact hard close.
so uh if we can end 10 minutes before the hour, I have to essentially do a scene change because we're directly following this with the daily space over on
Okay.
Twitch. So everyone be ready to switch channels and switch what we're talking about.
Okay. Great.
And hopefully the caffeine will kick in at some point.
I more coffee. Just keep going
Ugh.
until it's too much.
Well, unfortunately, my cup is now empty. There's nothing
Oh
in
no.
it
Now is
anymore.
that your first cup?
No.
All right. So let me know when you're ready to go.
Okay. I'm pressing record.
I am also
It
pressing
is
record.
recording.
Okay. Here we go. Astronomy Cast, episode 521, The Deep Space Network. Welcome to Astronomy Cast, our weekly facts-based journey through the cosmos, where we help you understand not only what we know, but how we know what we know. I'm Fraser Cain, publisher of Universe Today. With me, as always, is Dr. Pamela Gay, a senior scientist for the Planetary Science Institute and the director of CosmoQuest. Hey, Pamela, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you doing, Fraser?
Great. Sorry to everyone. We are recording this episode live at a different time, and that's because I wasn't here on Friday, and that's because I was in Costa Rica with my good friend Dr. Paul Sutter on our next Astro Tour. I'm not even going to remember which number this is now. I think it's number 4. Um, but this was amazing. We were in Costa Rica. We got a chance to see the Arenal volcano. Got to do river cruises, lake cruises. Well, one of each. So not is. And but probably we saw like many different kinds of monkeys. Probably my highlight was the hummingbird forest or hummingbird reserve, where they had set up like, I don't know, 40 hummingbird feeders, and there was probably 100 hummingbirds, like 10 different kinds of hummingbirds in the up in the cloud forest. It was absolutely amazing. We had a great time. Thanks everyone who joined us, and we recorded an episode all about dust, which I think is a topic we haven't covered too much. So dust and how that led to the Bicep 2 results being overturned. So it's sort of a fascinating story. And Paul was on the Planck team that helped overturn the results, so he had an inside scoop on the whole story. So we're gonna put this in as a bonus episode at some point this week or early next week. So. All right, Pamela, I don't know if you had anything to say. Should we just go right into the show?
I mean, if you want to join us on future Astro Tours, check out astrotours.co, and you can join me in the future. I'm going to be going along with Fraser, and we are going to be doing in June a Joshua Tree National Park trip. This is the All Stars trip with us, Paul Matt Sutter, John Gauthier, Skylius. It's kind of going to be amazing. So
Yeah.
if you looked before at the price and went, oh, no, can't. Well, look again, because the prices went down, and we're really hoping that you can join us out under the dark skies.
Yeah, so the price has been reduced. So go back to astrotours.co and then just go to the All Stars party, and then you'll see the new price. The reservation date has been pushed back a couple of weeks, so you still got a couple more weeks to make a decision on that. So definitely go and check that out. All right, let's get into the show. So we always focus on the missions, but there is an important glue that holds the whole system together, the Deep Space Network. Today, we're going to talk about how the system works and how it communicates with all the spacecraft out there in the solar system. All right, Pamela, it is a big oversight. And I think it's not just, I mean, I know some people will spend some time talking about the Deep Space Network, but I don't think people really think about how we are getting all of this data from all of these missions back on Earth at different distances. Some of them are in different locations. What is the mechanism? And that's the Deep Space Network. So what is it?
It is 3 different sites on the planet Earth that are distributed from east to west here in the United States, out in Goldstone in California, or near Goldstone. Goldstone is actually a ghost town that now I really want to go to after prepping for this show. Outside of Canberra in Australia, and outside of Madrid in Spain. These 3 different locations, the way they're spread out from east to west, mean that once you're located high enough above the planet Earth, you are always within sight of one of these 3 facilities, each of which is built kind of within a natural bowl in a valley between various mountains. This protects the telescopes from all the radio noise that you can get here on the surface of the planet, allowing them to focus on everything out there somewhere.
All right, so you've got 3 facilities at essentially 3 different portions on the globe, so that at least 2 or 1 is always being able to see the entire sky, so that all spacecraft can always be communicated with. What are the actual facilities like? What are they?
Well, they are each a set of different telescopes. This is one of the things that I think gets missed in the story a lot. It's not like there is the Goldstone telescope. Well, there is the Goldstone, but Deep Space Network at Goldstone is actually a suite of a bunch of different telescopes. Madrid is a suite of a bunch of different telescopes. And each of these different facilities has one 34-meter telescope, has 2 or more So let me start that over. Each of these facilities has one 34-meter high efficiency antenna. So this is the, hey, I got you, we're listening close right now. There's also two or more 34-meter beam waveguide antennas. There's some 26-meter dishes and one 70-meter antenna per facility. And it's these 70 meters that we're used to seeing in the pictures. They're big, they're dramatic. Goldstone, in addition to being used to receive sound, is also used to, well, it's also a radar dish. And so there is the occasional death to things like bees when they're igniting the radar on it to not just, well, catch the radar signals, but measure precisely where all of this stuff is in space.
So, so at each facility there is the collection of telescopes, and the big one is the 70-meter telescope, and then there are these other ones as well. And people always make this joke to me when we talk about how we're able to still communicate with the Voyagers and New Horizons, and they're so far away. You know, oh, we can communicate with a satellite that's billions of kilometers away, but I can't receive a cell phone signal. If you were willing to carry a 70-meter telescope in your pocket, you would always be able to get a cell phone signal. That would be no problem.
And unless you were, of course, one of these 70-meter telescopes, because they're in radio quiet zones. So I mean, there's a certain irony. The way they're set up, they are good for everything that is 30,000 kilometers and higher above the surface of the Earth. But you start getting lower down, and the shape of the planet, the mountains that surround them, all of these different things serve to isolate them from signals. So this is where the deep space in the Deep Space Network comes from is, well, you have to be high enough above the surface of the planet to make sure you're always within sight of one of these different dishes.
All right. And so then how does, like, operationally, how does this actually work?
It's all controlled out of the Jet Propulsion Lab out in Pasadena, California. This is a NASA facility that is owned and operated by Caltech. It actually had its roots as an Air Force facility back before 1958, got transferred over to NASA with the beginning of, well, Mercury and all of those humans going into space. And it was set up as a way to get signals back from the Mariner missions, to get signals back from all of these early missions in the 1950s. Now, with Explorer, it wasn't all that formalized. It was more a matter of, we're going to send these facilities out, we're going to have mobile radio receivers out in places like middle of nowhere Nigeria. Nigeria isn't in the middle of nowhere, but where they went sure was. And this combination of distributing human beings around the world with radio dishes meant that we could distribute spacecraft around the solar system and get the signals back to Earth. Unfortunately, planetary rotation does mean you have to distribute things around. And as we launched more and more facilities, it became clear that we needed to have a permanent facility here on the planet Earth dedicated to listening to what was going on out there. Now, in the 1960s, when this was really starting to pick up steam, we had the 1966 version of this, which included Goldstone, which has always been included in the network. Then we also had Woomera, Australia, Canterbury, Australia, where we still have locations. At that point, we included Johannesburg, South Africa, as well as Madrid, Spain. And then, of course, we had launch support out of Cape Canaveral and the Ascension Islands. Over the years, the facilities have become fewer in number, but more and more important in what they're able to do. And they've added more and more dishes that increase their capacity. And at this point, we are in the numbers in the 60s, where they have numbered each successive dish as they have continued to upgrade the systems at the various locations. And so out in Goldstone, we have numbers 11 through 14. in 74. But today, if you go to Deep Space Network now, you're going to find, well, those numbers aren't entirely the same as dishes have been replaced and upgraded.
Yeah, if you actually go, I mean, this is one of the best things that you can do. Go to it's eyes.nasa.gov/DSN, and then go to the Deep Space Network now. And so, just as an example, at the time that we're recording right now, out at Madrid, the big dish is talking to the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, and the next dish is also talking to MRO, and then one is talking to ACE. I'm not sure which that is. The Advanced Composition Explorer, and then the other one is talking to OSIRIS-REx. Out of Goldstone, one is talking to Stereo A, another is talking to the Geotail, one is talking to Juno, and one is talking to Hayabusa 2. Canberra, the big telescope, is offline right now, but the other one of them is talking to Voyager 2, one is talking to Juno, and the other is talking to Voyager 2. So you can just see, you go to Deep Space Network now, and you can see exactly who is talking to, or which dishes are talking to which spacecraft, how long it takes for the information to get. And this is what I love. Like, for example, Voyager 2, it takes 1.39 days for the light to get to and from Voyager 2 because of its distance into the solar system. Just an amazing sort of, and technical accomplishment. And you can see why it's the amount of data they can get is so low because they're so far.
And as we're starting to get more and more of these small space probes out at greater and greater distances, some of which count as no longer in our solar system, we're also having to expand how the network works. And one of the things that they're working on doing now is increasing the way the dishes work so they can array them together and get multiple individual dishes working as an array to all listen in on the same signal. And this ability to combine dishes has been used before. There were issues with the Galileo probe when it was out at Jupiter where it just didn't have a high gain antenna that worked the way it was supposed to. And so they had to use, well, more resources than were originally planned to get what data they could back down to Earth. And at various points throughout history, when there have been issues with spacecraft, they've combined multiple telescopes, they've brought in additional telescopes, sometimes using the Parkes telescope in Australia, so that they can catch these weaker signals to rescue spacecraft that just might need an extra hand up.
Now, I mean, radio waves are one of those few wavelengths where you can actually quite easily in real time, or even after the fact, combine the data signals together. So are they using like interferometry to actually
They are.
to combine the signals? Yeah. And so that, and I'm sure many of these dishes were brought in for the Event Horizon telescope, where they turned the entire planet into one big telescope to be able to observe the supermassive black hole at the heart of the Milky Way. So I didn't know that they use that method to be able to get some of those weaker signals as necessary. That's really interesting.
And what's interesting is there are a lot of assumptions that get made about how these different telescopes get used and where they do and don't get used. I've heard quite often, and I suspect we've even screwed up and said it before here on this show, that Arecibo gets used as part of the Deep Space Network, and it does not. The Deep Space Network is specifically these Goldstone, Madrid, and Canberra facilities. And where the confusion comes in is Goldstone has other dishes that are used for other things. It uses its large dish also for radar work, and Goldstone and Arecibo work together as radar facilities to help us measure asteroids and other objects as needed. And there's a few other radar dishes out there. Haystack Observatory in Massachusetts. There's facilities out in the UK. So we have other radar dishes around the world, but it's this combination of Arecibo and Goldstone are two of our main radar dishes. And Goldstone is also part of the Deep Space Network that leads to some of these confusions. In general, this is a facility that is quite happy to sit there going, we shall listen to spacecraft and leave science to all those other dishes out there.
And so I can sort of imagine that in some cases, like all the spacecraft are out there, and they are waiting to, they're gathering up all of their science, and then they're waiting for their turn to transmit the signals home. And so we would probably get more science from these spacecraft if we had more facilities. Like, is it like this? The more missions you have, the more capacity you need in the network. Are one of these behind one of the other?
With the spaceflight operations facility that they've built out at JPL, they do a lot of queue systems where they're like, okay, so this spacecraft is here in this orbit. It will be visible to the Earth at this point. So we schedule it now. And so there's a lot of careful choreography that goes into getting signals back to Earth. We also are starting to find that radar systems, not radar systems, radio systems are cheap enough to build and are efficient enough to build that some places like the Advanced Physics Laboratory out on the East Coast at Johns Hopkins University, they're in some cases building their own receivers. We have telescopes in the I'm going to make all the typos. I'm sorry, Susie. We also see that some of the European Space Agency facilities have their own radio receivers. And with the ability of smaller institutions to get all of their data down for themselves, it's this balancing of, yes, the Deep Space Network does need to build more telescopes that it can use to receive the signals from these distant space probes. But at the same time, some of these space probes can also just send their messages straight back to their principal investigators institution. And the Deep Space Network isn't for all the low Earth orbit stuff. It's only for the more distant objects, and that frees up the network as well when it doesn't have to listen to things like Discover as it, well, discovers our own planet Earth.
Uh, so, I mean, do you think that, I mean, we're at a point where like bigger telescopes are going to be necessary, more telescopes, or do you feel like we're at a point where, I mean, it's interesting to see how like the Europeans have their own version of this. I'm sure the Russians have their ability to communicate with all of their spacecraft, and yet when needed, I know you get these. Sometimes you'll see this in press releases where some really interesting thing is happening at a time when, say, the European network isn't going to be able to see it, and so NASA will pitch in. And as I mentioned, right now, the Deep Space Network is observing the Hayabusa mission, so you can see that they're getting involved. So, I mean, do we see this collaboration between the different nations coming together to be able to help each other out as scientists?
There's definitely a great deal of collaboration that goes on. This is part of the treaties in many cases between the different nations, where there are trades for getting instruments to fly in spacecrafts, getting time on the Deep Space Network, getting data. All of these different things can be traded with no cost agreements where the US will provide something that they pay for on their side and get something that isn't money in exchange that has real value for us. So when we look to missions like Hayabusa, yes, they totally use the Deep Space Network. Space IL is going to be using the Deep Space Network with their little Beresheet lander when it gets to the moon. And all of these different agreements work together to get more science done. Now, one of the interesting things to me in terms of how do we choose to expand the Deep Space Network to meet the coming needs of the future? We have two things happening simultaneously. One is the miniaturization of the transmitters that are going on spacecraft, where we're capable to more effectively send back signals than we could in the past. And we can send back tighter signals than we could in the earliest spacecraft. And on the Earth, that same miniaturization is making our systems more and more sensitive. So, as we're able to essentially shout into the void more effectively with all of our spacecraft, we are also able to more effectively listen in from the surface of the planet. As this trade off continues, yes, we're going to continue to need these large dishes, but how do we choose to expand? And it looks like the answer is going to be uh, building arrays of dishes instead of building the large single dishes that we built in the past.
Yeah, and that was sort of my next question, was like, do we need a bigger dish? But it sounds like that's not the plan. The plan is more but smaller.
And the other thing that we haven't figured out that's definitely going to affect long-term planning is what is the role of CubeSats going to be? Because a CubeSat, by its nature, is not going to be able to have a massive power source and a massive high gain antenna to send data back to the Earth. And if we move to building more and more CubeSats like the ones that we sent to Mars alongside the InSight lander, that may necessitate changing how we think about the deep space network.
It's interesting as well. I mean, even just the name, right? Deep Space Network. You imagine that it is this network out in the solar system of all of these spacecraft that are sending all these communications back and forth, or like but it's all just here on Earth. Like the point is that
It
it's communicating with space, with stuff that's out deep in space, and as you mentioned, not orbiting close to the Earth, but out the missions that are out exploring the solar system. But if we did want to take it to that next level, and actually expand the infrastructure off Earth, what what would you want to do
Well, so the irony of expanding the deep space network
into
off
space?
Earth is then you have to have all of the receivers on Earth to receive the signal from the deep space network that you've now put into space. So there's a certain level of irony involved in that, which tells me let's not do that. I think what we need in order to expand the capacity of the deep space network is I'd like to see more redundancy in sites, more redundancy in the receivers that we're using. One of the issues that we have today is if you need to do maintenance on one of the receivers, if you want to upgrade one of your receivers, you have to take it offline, which means that there can be gaps in coverage for some of those space probes that are out there that require specific of the receivers here on Earth. So, greater redundancy and greater coverage, you never know when the weather is going to strike, the world is going to rumble, something's going to happen that knocks one of these facilities offline. So for me, it's all about the redundancy and keeping it on Earth to, in this one case, reduce the irony.
Um, Now, we talked briefly about some of the science that gets done using these facilities, but I wanted to sort of talk a bit about what kinds of projects can you use this when you're not just communicating to spacecraft and you're actually using these dishes for astronomical science. What are some projects that they've gotten involved in?
Well, as I mentioned, the Goldstone also has the capacity to be a radar. This means that when asteroids get close enough to the planet Earth, we are capable of using radar to determine their shapes. Essentially, you blast them with light, and where there's a hollow on the asteroid, it takes longer for that light to bounce back to Earth. Where there's a hill, it gets back a little bit faster. And this is one of the cooler uses. Now, in addition to this, they can also, of course, be used to listen to the radio waves that are coming from objects near and far, whether it be listening to Jupiter and the interactions of its magnetic field and the lightning and all the fabulous other things that generate radio signals from Jupiter. That's one possibility. You can also listen to active galactic nuclei in many cases. These accretion disks around supermassive black holes are giving off radio light. Their jets are giving off radio light. Young stars, T-Tauri stars, have radio emissions. All of these different sources that give off light in these longer wavelengths that are identical to the ones that your radio picks up, and much longer, much longer as well. All of these longer wavelengths are things that these facilities have the capacity to study. And of course, there's always that capacity that we don't use all that often to go searching for extraterrestrial intelligence.
Uh, was that you setting up for us to search for extraterrestrial intelligence?
No,
Have they
that's
been?
just me setting up to prevent all of the emails of, but you didn't say.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. They would be wonderful tools for searching for extraterrestrial intelligence, but they're busy and very rarely are they ever called on to do that. And that's why you've got the private antenna
yeah.
like the Allen array and things like that. And the SETI Institute is, people don't, I think, realize. I mean, using these big radio telescopes for searching for aliens is a no-no. You have to
Yeah.
use the SETI Institute uses private funding and their own private radio
The
telescope
Allen
network, the
Telescope
Allen
Array.
Telescope
Yeah.
Array, to be able to do their own searches. And so you don't. And I think occasionally, like a couple of times, they've transmitted signals out into space to let
And
the
that's
aliens
the
know that we're
Deep
here.
Space Communications Network,
Right.
just to be confusing when you Google.
Yeah.
So, Deep Space Network, DSN, is how we listen to spacecraft and sometimes radar image asteroids. The Deep Space Communications Network is completely separate, and that is how we send signals potentially to other life in the solar system and beyond.
Yeah, and we won't get into the argument on whether that's a good idea or not.
It's true.
Um, cool. Well, that's awesome. I'm excited. I'm really glad we covered this topic because it's just like it is literally like if this system wasn't functioning, none of the other science would be getting back to Earth. It is the bedrock that all of this stuff requires. And once you just watch the Deep Space Now network now and just watch who's communicating, and your brain starts to understand a little bit more about just where the spacecraft are in the solar, just this orientation, which I think we lose sight of, that the Earth is spinning and the spacecraft are out there in the solar system and they're moving around, and there are times when you can communicate with things and times when you can't at different, and I love to be able to do that. So thanks for going into this topic.
Well, and thank you for being here. And thank you, audience, for being here. And before we
Oh,
end,
you
I just want to
remembered.
take a brief, I did
Yeah,
remember.
that's awesome.
I just want to take a moment to thank some of our Patreons. We thank patrons right here on air. And if you want to hear your name read out and know how grateful I am for everything that you do that lets me pay Susie.
Okay, but
Um,
before you read the names, can I just give
yeah,
one quick just sort of explanation why this is important? Um,
yeah,
like when you look at what's happening on the internet today, right? Various people are trying to figure out business models to be able to operate what they do. You're seeing either really awful advertising or people gathering up your information on your cellular phone and then selling it, selling your personal privacy information. You're seeing paywalls going up, which are blocking people's access to be able to get information. And so, what are the options for us as content creators? We want our information to be an educational resource that can get out there and be available to as many people as humanly possible. We don't want to block the information, but at the same time, as you mentioned, Pamela, we want to be able to pay Susie, our editor. We want to be able to cover our hosting costs. We want to be able to pay for servers. Still to this day, I think you and I are still doing this on a volunteer basis, and that is
yeah.
because we've chosen getting the content out there over us being able to put it behind some kind of paywall and do it. So Patreon is the solution that allows a small group of people to be able to fund what gets done so that the largest possible group of people can receive the podcast without having to put it behind a paywall and without having to put a mountain of advertising on it over top of it. And the more as we can move towards it being more of a Patreon covered model, then you move into this, I think, this beautiful future world where a small group of fans help allow a piece of content to exist to be available to a larger group of fans, and it is a beautiful system. And we're in this sort of uncomfortable in between times where we have to have advertising or people have to start putting things behind paywalls. So I think it's just important, like even not just in generally specifically for this podcast, but for any content that you enjoy where you've got a much smaller, more intimate relationship with the creators who make this kind of thing, you can support their work directly, and it doesn't take a lot of people to be able to make the content that you love available forever across all of the all of the platforms and not have to put it behind paywalls and stuff. So again, just wherever you are, if there's things that you enjoy, consider supporting them directly, and of course consider supporting what I do on Universe Today and what we do here with Astronomy Cast and what Pamela does as well. So that done. Thanks to
John Jorst, Jordan Young, Burry Gowan, Ramji Anatmatu, Andrew Palestra, David Trogue, Brian Cagle, The Giant Nothing, Laura Kettleson, Robert Plasma, and Emily Patterson. And there will be more names next week. Thank you all so much for being here.
All right. And thanks, Pamela, for bringing the brain. We'll see you next week.
Bye-bye, everyone. And now we save. So we have about 5 minutes.
Perfect.
And then I need to set up for the daily space.
So Arjun asked a bunch of really great questions that I suspect we have no idea what the answer is. So clearly I need to find someone who works with the Deep Space Network to actually answer a bunch of these very technical questions. Things like, how far in advance does a mission like Europa Clipper have to tell DSN that it will need time? So I don't know what the scheduling,
I have no idea.
I mean, I'm assuming when you put together your proposal for your mission, you have to negotiate time, and that could be one of the limiters, right?
Yeah.
That if your spacecraft requires too much time on the DSN, then that might be a showstopper.
Yeah, I agree.
So, Arjun, I will, after this show, I will find a person who works with the Deep Space Network, and I will schedule them to come on Open Space or the Weekly Space Hangout or something. So, thanks.
That's cool. Thank you.
Because that was a great question. They're all great questions, right? Like, do you have to vie for time? Does it operate based on TCP? I don't know. Have you ever been involved in any of the kind of radio protocols that work with some of these? I mean, I'm sure
not in a long time. I started in radio a million years ago and then quickly migrated to using archival data once I started adulting because I attract clouds.
Right. Yeah. And Zapfan asks, are they planning on using optical links? So is there any plans to use any kind of optical technology for Deep Space Network?
Not right now. Not for the mainstream NASA stuff.
One thing that NASA is testing, they just did a test on the International Space Station, is using gamma radiation. So they've got X-rays. Sorry, not gamma, X-rays. So there is an experiment on the station where two parts will communicate in X-rays to test that out, because you can get a more like coherent beam, less overall energy. And one of the real advantages with X-rays is that you can communicate with a spacecraft while it is re-entering the Earth's atmosphere. So one of the problems is that you actually can't, as the spacecraft is entering the Earth's atmosphere, there's a moment where there's so much ionization around it that it interrupts radio transmissions. That's why there's always this sort of scary time when you don't know if your astronauts are doing, watch Apollo 13, and there's a moment where they can't find out if anything's going wrong.
Yeah.
But apparently X-rays will actually allow you to communicate with a spacecraft while it's re-entering the Earth's atmosphere. So there's a bunch of advantages, and they're testing this out as a way to communicate in space. So
it also just feels like a really good way to irradiate your astronauts. And I'm sure they've thought about this, but my stomach, which does not have a brain, is screaming, no, don't do that. My brain is intrigued.
Yeah, yeah. But I think the point is you aim very carefully at the receiver and hit
Yeah.
that, and not aim at the astronauts. So, and also over long distances, you're not going to be sending a lot of X-ray photons. So, all right.
Yeah.
Well, we've reached the end of our time. I know you've got to like caffeine up much more before
Yes.
you proceed
So,
into the next
and
thing.
folks, if you go to twitch.tv/CosmoQuestX, I will be going live in 16 minutes with the Daily Space.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Pamela, and we will see you all. I guess Friday.
Yep.
All right, the normal time. All right, we'll see you
Okay.
then, everybody. Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye bye.